Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our end-of-year webinar, the last webinar we'll do in 2021. We want to talk about the year we've had in GA safety and what a year it's been in general aviation this year. To start out with, a little spoiler alert, this has been the safest year in general aviation that we've had in the history of general aviation. And what that means is the impact of that is dozens more people sitting around the holiday tables with their families this season and spending time with their families because they made it through the year safely. It's an exciting year. We're going to talk about that. Our manager of data and analytics, Rob Geske, is going to help us talk about general aviation safety and some of the stats we saw and perhaps why it was such a safe year. And then we're going to pick out a couple of accidents and just pick them apart and talk about them a little bit. Alicia Herron, one of our writers in the Air Safety Institute, will pick an accident from the backcountry. And then John Collins is going to talk about a VFR into IMC accident, an issue that is particularly problematic for us in general aviation and one we'd really like to show some improvement on next year, and we'll talk about that. And that's what Paul Derez, our manager of safety programs, is going to talk about, a little bit about what we're going to tee up going into 2022. So thanks for joining us. Sit back with your favorite beverage and let's have an enjoyable evening talking about GA safety. And Rob, what a year it's been in general aviation for safety.
It definitely has been, Richard. Our lowest year since we've started this recording process. It's just overall great for GA. More people home with their family. Really, really hard work on all of us. And I think we should all take a collective pat on the back. Yeah. The rate that the fiscal year rate is what we're talking about, and that fiscal year rate year over year, the initial indicators are that it looks like it's something like a 30 to 35% improvement in the rate year over year from 2020, and that's fantastic. Any thoughts why? How did we do so well?
We
really don't know why we did so well. I think the general thought is. And when we look at the data, there's a broad reduction in all accident categories. So there's not one that particularly stands out, but we've conquered really each category, and we've done a good job of overall broad reduction.
I think we came up with the 5-point safety model in ASI, and we think of it this way. We think if you take pilots and you train them well, knowledgeable pilots, train them well, keep them proficient in reliable equipment, and surround them in a culture that encourages good decision making, that's the key to safety. And I think the key is not just one of those, but all of those. I get asked all the time, how do I become a safer pilot? And my answer is, you've got to hit all 5 of those principles to be a safer pilot.
Absolutely.
So we saw that across the board, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, we'd love to know why. It's always hard to talk about the accident that you prevented, the accident that didn't happen. I don't think it's a coincidence, though, that our material and other safety providers that I talk to, my colleagues in the industry, they talk about an increase in their consumption of materials across the board. So for us, we saw something like a 40% year-over-year increase in consumption of our material. Some 12 million times it was accessed last year. I don't think that's a coincidence that people are consuming more safety material and the safety rate's going down. So, good stuff. So, why don't we talk about a couple of the accidents that we did see last year and how they were kind of representative of some of the things we're seeing. Alicia, you were talking about, you spent some time in the backcountry this season, as did I. So you mentioned a backcountry accident that kind of got your attention.
Yes, so there was an accident that happened this summer at the early summer, I guess technically spring, in May with the Bonanza at Sulphur Creek. And something that we have, as ASI have focused on quite a lot this year is a focus on the backcountry as it becomes more and more popular and more pilots want to access it, and we want to help them, of course, access it safely so that we can keep pilots flying into the backcountry and also keep these places accessible to us, because a huge part about that is making sure that there aren't accidents.
Yeah, you're right. We spent a lot of time back there this summer for that reason. We see it as a growing segment of general aviation, and it's attracting new people to general aviation. And some of the newer faces that we want to be part of general aviation, our concern is that they may not understand how challenging it is to fly in the backcountry. And so that's why we put together this Backcountry Safety Coalition, but we can talk about that in a little bit. So I'm sorry, go ahead. You were talking about the Bonanza accident.
Exactly, and sort of going back to what you were saying and just how challenging it is, this accident in particular was with an experienced pilot in an airplane that he had quite a lot of time in. He had been to Sulphur Creek before and had, I believe, is actually based in Idaho.
I think you're right, at least part of the time, but I think he's based there, his airplane's based there, and he'd a lot of time in that airplane, and he'd flown into Sulphur Creek in that airplane before. So experienced guy in an environment he was familiar with.
Exactly, and it just goes to show how quickly conditions can change. So it's this beautiful, you know, as far as the weather reports say, it was a beautiful VFR day, no significant weather in the area. It's 10 in the morning, it's late May, so it's density altitude wasn't the factor that it can become, you know, as the season progresses and it gets hotter. And this pilot goes to take off, gets a court in, and this, again, this is or for the first time, this is a one-way in, one-way out strip. And so sometimes you do have to take off with a tailwind, which is something that if you fly often in the backcountry, you're familiar with and know what that's like. And he goes to take off, gets a quartering tailwind, and then that becomes a strong gust from the left, realizes, and I think that this speaks to his experience, realizes that this takeoff can't continue as he continues to use up that 3,300 feet of runway he had, and goes into a field, forced landing, walks away from it, the plane is damaged, and, you know, has a bad day, but it could have been much worse.
Yeah, I think you're right about the experience level there and not continuing that takeoff in that. And that was a classic case, which we see a lot in the backcountry, where in Sulphur Creek especially, I've been in there several times, where people like to go in there, they serve a fantastic breakfast there, and so people will fly in there and they'll just have casual conversation like we're having, and the day clicks on and clicks on, and the next thing you know, they're departing late, the winds have picked up, sometimes the density altitude is picked up. I don't think it was really a case in this accident. But that's what happened, is the winds picked up on him. So the winds were okay as he was departing, but he got a strong gust that came, and then I think you're right, he made a decision that he couldn't make it out of that canyon with that tailwind and decided to abort. And it reminds me of what my friend Mike Vivian says, you know, if you're looking at an off-airport place, especially in the backcountry, if it looks rough, it is. If it looks smooth, it might be. And in this case, there was a trench there that he didn't see, and so when he put it back down, he hit the trench, and then the airplane flipped, and thankfully, you know, he was okay.
It's unfortunate that, you know, the aircraft was damaged, but it's great that he had, I think, the experience, you know, to decide, I'm not going to continue with this takeoff. I cannot continue with this takeoff any longer, because I think that a less experienced pilot would have tried to force that, and that would have been a really, really ugly conclusion with that wind that came out of nowhere.
You know what I'm thinking of, right? You know what I'm thinking of? When you and I were at 1MT0, nine-quarter circle dude ranch this summer. Talk to us about that takeoff.
So this airport, it's a similar airport to Sulphur Creek. It's higher up,
a little higher,
about
right?
1,000 feet higher, but it's about 700 feet longer, and we were there in the summer with very experienced, more experienced than frankly either of us are in the backcountry. And we're being very careful about the weather. It was a beautiful, beautiful morning when we flew in. No significant wind, and we could sort of choose the way we wanted to fly the pattern. And out of nowhere, the windsock just picks up. That calm day turns into this sort of intense, windy morning that we now have to deal with as we're getting out. And it was almost to the point where if it had gotten windier, we would have had to stay at the dude ranch. But the takeoff was, somebody had taken off right before us.
In a carbon cub. Remember, and he had gone to the west. And the wind started picking up coming out of the west, and he called back in and said, hey, don't do it. Because he had trouble in a carbon cub climbing over those the ridges to make the departure. So that's why we all decided to go downhill with just what was at the time really just a slight tailwind. And to your point, that's not unusual in the backcountry.
It was probably less. It was going from hardly any wind to probably less than 5 knots as we were taxiing down, lining up to get ready to depart this field. And I was in a 182 with another pilot and a passenger, and we had to use all of the performance of that airplane and all of pretty much the limit of my skill as a pilot to make sure that we could get out of there, just because of how complex the wind got just in seconds on us. And then you guys, it was changing so quickly. It was changing really by the second. And then you were next, or you weren't next to take off?
Yeah, I think Mike was next.
Okay.
So Mike was next in the 175, I think it is, that he has. And he got, I saw it from the back, he got hit with a big gust and aborted his takeoff and still had to wrestle with the airplane to keep it down. I remember watching him and thinking to myself, if a lesser experienced pilot that wasn't as familiar with the backcountry in that condition, I think that would have been a takeoff ground loop at a minimum. But so then, you know, we just waited until we caught the winds and then we were able to get out. But a similar scenario to what happened at Sulphur Creek, and the whole lesson learned from that is, you know, the experienced backcountry pilots that fly back there a lot, they like to say, be down by 10 a.m. Don't plan to fly any later than 10 a.m. because when those winds start picking up, they can pick up on you pretty rapidly. And your first indication is you'll just start to see the windsock, it'll just start to fluff a little bit, you know. And when you start to see that windsock fluff a little bit back there, that means you better get on
Things
it.
are changing.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a good accident with a lot of lessons learned. And like you, I looked at that because I was a really experienced pilot, you know, that happened to. And so, yeah, a lot of good came out of that. So, back to the reason why we spent a lot of time in the backcountry is we wanted to help with backcountry safety. So we put together this Backcountry Safety Coalition. It's a coalition of about maybe a dozen or so or more organizations and people that are just, we kind of loosely come together. We meet a few times a year, and our whole purpose is just to try to help with safety and stewardship in the backcountry as people come into there and start this new kind of flying to see some of the challenges that they're up against. So we collaborate on messaging and techniques and training fields that we think can help people get ready for the backcountry. So a great accident to take a look at. John, you have one that deals with VFR and IMC.
I do.
And that is a particular interest to us because, Rob, I think we were looking at the latest NAL report, and there's some in 2019, there were 18 VFR into IMC accidents. So
Fatal accidents.
Fatal accidents, yeah, fatal accidents, good point. So, you know, more than one a month, 1.5, sometimes 2 a month, and that's just unacceptable.
And they're by and large preventable.
Yeah.
A good weather brief, a solid strategy on when to divert, how to get out of it are all key players in preventing that accident.
Yep.
So John, talk to us about the accident you were...
So this accident actually is not from 2021, but I have one that I want to bring up a little bit later that just happened. But this one occurred in 2019 in September. The pilot was flying from South Lake Tahoe up to Nampa, Idaho. They were in a 182, as 2 people in the aircraft. They departed about mid-morning and picked up VFR flight following just a little bit northeast of Carson City, and was flying up that way. They leveled off at about 8,000 feet and then decided they needed to climb up south of Reno. They needed to climb up and get up to about 10,500 feet. The controller noticed that they were making they turned northwest a little bit, and then they were going to turn, they started a descending turn back to the right. And the controller queried them as to, you know, what are your intentions? Are you trying to come back to Reno? There was no response, and kind of watched the track until the radar return disappeared, unfortunately, and then sent out an alert notice. They found the aircraft just below the top of a ridge northeast of Reno near Nixon, Nevada. And it looks like it had all the markings, and the NTSB actually came out with the probable cause that it was a loss of control while maneuvering due to spatial disorientation brought upon by an unintentional entry into VFR into IMC. So it was classic. There were the weather reports that day. They had levels of clouds, few broken, overcast, and I think it sounds like the pilot was trying to get around them. You know, we don't really know what the pilot had in terms of a weather briefing. There was no record of an official brief, but you know, like Rob said, that's key to preventing an accident like this. Getting a good weather briefing ahead of time, updating it, and keeping track of things while you're in flight.
So all of us up here are CFIs.
Yep.
Why do these keep happening? I mean, we keep seeing these. They're a nagging issue. We haven't made a lot of progress. They've come down some over the years. but still 1.5 a month on average is too much. Why? Why do they keep happening?
I wonder if it's because we've never experienced actual IMC, or seldom experienced actual IMC in training. You know, we had the view limiting devices on foggles or the hood. I think once you experience it, though, you didn't realize, oh my gosh, this is what it's like, and then it becomes spatial disorientation and sometimes a fatal result.
I also think that we don't, maybe, just from what you're saying, you can totally go through your instrument training and even your double eye training and never actually fly in the clouds.
Right.
And so
That's
it's
true.
one thing to fly with the, the hood on or the foggles on and know you can take it off at any time, and know that you have a pilot there next to you who's looking outside on a nice beautiful day. It's completely another thing, as you're saying, to fly into the clouds, experience that disorienting moment of I am, as I say, in the soup, and experiencing real spatial disorientation in actual IMC and overcoming it is so different than having your CFI say, all right, put your head down, what are you doing, turn around, get yourself out of this, and you saying, okay, yay, I get to check a box for my check ride. No, you need to take that seriously, because it could be, the difference between getting out of a situation like that and losing control of the airplane. So it's far more than a box to be checked. I'm sort of on my soapbox right now, but
Anybody?
No, that's fine. You're right on target, Alicia. It is, and VFR and IMC is a true, genuine emergency. I mean, and I think that's part of it as well. We don't recognize that as an emergency. Oh, I'm in the clouds. Okay, and fully a third of the VFR and IMC accidents are occurring with instrument-rated pilots. Now
Yeah.
they may not be current. They may not be
But
proficient.
John, that's a really good point, is that it doesn't just happen to VFR pilots. A third of them are IFR-rated pilots who are either in equipment they're not proficient in,
Right.
or they haven't actually flown in the clouds in a while, or maybe they weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
Because I don't care how proficient you are, if you fly into IMC conditions and you're not ready for it, it's tough to recover when you're behind the game when you go into the
I think
clouds.
we also see a lot of these accidents. It's get-home-itis. I'm pressing on. I have a plan. I need to execute this plan. I've got to get there for whatever reason. And I like to tell my students, and I tell audiences that I talk to all the time, there is no flight in general aviation that I have to take off for. No flight.
Yeah, probably one of the best things you can do in terms of safety, and this is especially important over the holidays for general aviation, is to build in flexibility in your plan. And to tell the people at both ends that general aviation requires flexibility. You'll do your best to get there, but you may not, plus or minus a day or two based on the weather. So, Rob, these things are fatal too, right? VFR and IMC?
They are incredibly fatal, high lethality. 70–75% of them end in a fatal accident. So getting in them is just absolutely incredibly dangerous. And the bigger thing is it's insidious. It isn't that it's just the VFR and IMC accidents, it's that it's a contributing factor in numerous other types of accidents. People who are losing control of the aircraft, people who are ending up in CFIT, even pilots who are losing the equipment, like the wings are breaking apart from spatial disorientation. They all start with that first part of becoming disoriented or getting into a VFR and IMC situation. And again, we train it kind of suddenly as a CFI. We tell students, put the foggles on, take the foggles off. What really happens, and we've probably all been there, picking our way, thinking it's still VFR, it's still good. It was 10 miles, it's 3 miles, it's 2 miles, it's 1 mile. I know it's clear on the other side. I'm in it this far, just keep pushing. And it's finally when it's all closed in around us that our options are almost all gone.
You make a really good point, Rob, that number that we threw out, 18 or so, I think, in 2019 of VFR into IMC, is only the ones that are directly attributed to that.
Correct.
There's more where the VFR into IMC was probably the initiating cause, but then they had CFIT or whatever the case was. But so there's probably more that are out there where we're just pushing the limits on the weather. And the thing is, we have all this technology in the cockpits now, like Sirius XM weather, where you can see where the weather is and the visibility. We have so much better capability in our cockpits now than we had previously.
But it gets back down to the individual pilot. What happens when you get into a situation that you're not prepared for? What happens physically to you? Your hand tightens on the yoke, right? You get that, it's full on there. You're focused on one thing to the exclusion of all others, and you're trying to make that happen. And then you notice something else is going wrong, and then you try to make that happen. So relax, shake it out. You know, if you have an autopilot and you know how to use it, turn it on, or a wing leveler, turn it on. If your whole hand is wrapped around the control yoke, you're not going to be able to feel and respond to the aircraft's motion. You're gonna overcorrect for things.
So has anybody in here had spatial disorientation before, like for real, in the airplane in the weather?
I had it as a flight instructor many years ago. I was teaching in actual IMC, teaching NDB approaches, of all things, and and it wasn't
NDB. Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't. In fact, good old days. Yeah, it wasn't partial panel, thankfully, but just for that brief moment, you know, the orientational needle, I lost my bearings for just a second, but it seemed like a lifetime, and it was terrifying. And to John's point, I became completely fixated on that one instrument. It's all I could look at, it's all I could think about was what is wrong, why is it not doing what I think it should be doing, and also I snapped out of it and realized, okay, I need to turn this way or that way to correct myself. But it was pretty scary, and everything else that I should have done went out the window. As far as I didn't declare emergency, I didn't tell ATC I was in trouble, I didn't try to just breathe a little bit, calm down. It was just that terrifying moment. So, yeah.
I agree with you. The word terrifying there is, because when you have that happen and you're either the PIC or you're solo and you lose orientation, then you realize I'm the only one that can save this situation, and I've lost my orientation. It is kind of a terrorizing thought, and it goes back to, you have to be trained to go back to that attitude indicator and get yourself straight and level. And then what's hard about it is all the sensors that we use on a day-to-day basis, walking around at 2 knots and 1 G, right, that we rely on to live, we have to completely disregard them when we're airborne in the weather like that, because they're lying to you. And so the things that you rely on 99% of your life, you have to distrust that now and focus on this instrument.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest part of it, but it's life-saving, it's essential.
Yeah, and I want to add something real quick to what John's point about these are emergency situations. And I think we still hear from pilots, and we hear stories about pilots that's not declaring emergency.
Yeah.
And pilots should know, who are watching us tonight, that ATC can declare an emergency for you. But we still have to encourage pilots to be more proactive, recognizing, okay, I am in a situation I need to get out of right away.
So wait, you want me to fess up to ATC that I'm a VFR pilot and I flew into the clouds? I'm going to get violated. Why would I do that?
Yeah, no, you're not going to get violated. I mean, you're not going to fill out paperwork. You're going to get help from ATC. They're going to make sure their goal is to get you safely through that emergency. You know, the last thing they're thinking about is we need to get all the information so we can send them an ASTIgram. No, that's not it at all. They're there to help you and ask for that help. Now, ATC may give you some instructions, and one thing I do want to point out is that what we teach as instructors, we teach that 180-degree turn, and that's a good maneuver, and it can be helpful in certain circumstances. But as we saw in this particular accident, that 180-degree turn turned into a descending spiral or descending turn, and they ended up with the CFIT into the mountain ridge. Slow down. You don't have to make that whole 180 degrees at one time. Take small bites out of it, and don't use a large bank angle. Keep it to 10 degrees, and again, fingertip control, and pause. The other thing is that, and this is the accident I wanted to bring up that we got today. We read about it this morning.
I want to just plug Rob. Every week, Rob will send us sort of a tranche of NTSB reports, the initial, the preliminary, and then the final reports. And today, we had several of them come out. One of them was a VFR and IMC. That one was really interesting.
It was. That was actually a flight of 2, and the lead aircraft, unfortunately, got disoriented and ended up crashing. The trailing aircraft was using ForeFlight and had actually gotten a notification that they were too low. And so they climbed, and then they were still in the clouds. And this pilot, like the pilot in our other accident, was not an instrument-rated pilot. So kind of a gutsy move to climb and stay in the clouds and continue on. But I think, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to him and get some more information, or the NTSB will get that in their investigation. Maybe they were looking at the ForeFlight information. They could see, okay, we've got 10, 20 miles, whatever, to get out of the clouds, and that will be we'll be okay. If you can climb and maybe pop out on top, okay.
Yeah.
There are plenty of cases where pilots have done that, and again, no no punishment for that. They survived. So I think, Rob, you're working on or you're getting ready to release a study here about VFR and IMC, right?
Yeah, later towards the end of this year.
And those are actually all out of the ASRS reports, and so not accidents.
So that accident you talked about, John, I thought that was interesting for several reasons and worth reading. And maybe we'll do an accident case study on it if we can get all the materials, because it was a really good VFR and IMC, and it goes to decision making. So two pilots, and they decide whether the weather's kind of iffy. I think it was 1,500, 2,000 was the weather, and I didn't see the visibility, which to me is key. If you're going to go in a lower ceiling condition than you're comfortable with, you have to have visibility. I'm more worried about visibility, quite frankly, than I am cloud heights. And in this case, obviously they had bad visibility because seemed like they were on the verge. Should we go? Should we not? Okay, we'll go. And they had an alternate 30 miles up the road, and they said, if it's bad, we'll just go to the alternate. As soon as they take off, the pilot mentioned in the report that the visibility was really bad, right off the bat. And so right off the bat, they're on the verge of going anyway. It should have been the decision, this is a bad idea. And so we give a seminar on that, on why good pilots make bad decisions. And one of the things that comes out of that is that initial decision you make is so very important, because as human beings, the way we process information, we are very reluctant to go revisit a decision we've already made. And so that's a classic case where they had already made the decision, and even though the data was worse than what they made the decision on, they still elected to continue. And that just illustrates how hard that is to reverse yourself. So,
but I think in certain circumstances, a climb is warranted as opposed to a turn.
Yeah, talk about that. Doug Stewart from SAFE is pushing that quite a bit,
yeah,
and I find that kind of controversial, and I'm not sure where I stand on that.
Well, and in this particular accident, it worked well for that one pilot. And again, don't do a combined maneuver. Don't do a climbing turn or don't do a descending turn, but one maneuver at a time to minimize any loss of control or any spatial disorientation. But the climb, I think, in a lot of circumstances, because so many of these VFR and IMC end up as a CFIT at the final end of it, it's important to get away from that. Climb up, get away from the ground, and get it in the clouds. Now, if you're taking on ice, that may not be the right option.
Yeah,
but it's
very much situationally dependent. But if you're in the hills and establishing a climb, what I like about this option is, the typical routine we teach is when you get in the clouds, you should have just gotten in them, so just turn around and go back to where it's clear, right? But
it's not that simple.
A lot of times,
sometimes.
yeah, it's not that simple because we've gone in so deep that it's kind of closed in behind us. And so Doug is advocating, and the GAJSC is studying this, about one of the options we should teach pilots is, under the right conditions, climb. And maybe you can climb to get on top of it, maybe you can climb to get on the terrain. That's one reason. Right. The other reason is the most likely case of a non-IFR trained pilot is they're going to start that 180 turn and get disoriented. Yeah. Because after a few seconds, and I forget how many it is, when you're in a slight turn, if you're not monitoring your attitude instruments and you have no reference outside, now your body adjusts and thinks that small turn is level flight. So when you go to roll out, it thinks you're in a turn the other way. And that's what starts the disorientation. And that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why Doug is advocating straight and level climb and see if you can get out of it.
Well, and as you know, pilots and all of us, as the ceiling starts coming down, we start going down.
That's right.
So you tend to always keep going down and down
true.
and down as you get into it. And now you're back to where terrain was before. Terrain was never the issue. So executing a turn down there, because you've constantly tried to keep under the ceiling, has put you in a more dangerous position. And we talk about that insidious nature. This is a case where you can set up for CFIT, and it was that VFR into IMC that drove you to the CFIT accident.
Yeah. So that being the case, Paul, VFR and IMC, we're tired of this. There's too many of them. What are we going to do about it? We in ASI.
Yeah, so we got Rob helping us next year with a few projects. One of them we talked about the report he's going to be working on for later this year. And next year, Rob, we're doing going to redo the 170 seconds to live, video, and study. And the difference is going to be about modern technology in the cockpits. Can you tell us more about that project and our approach to that?
So that original study, 178 seconds, was conducted in the 1950s, and it was in Bonanzas. They took students up who had never flown in any simulated instrument, any hood time simulators, And they put these student private pilots into the exact VFR and IFR scenario, and they timed how long it took them to lose control of the aircraft. On average, 178 seconds. And that's where it comes from. And part of that 1950 study led to the Air Safety Foundation at the time, now the Air Safety Institute, advocating for that 3 hours of hood time, to getting all of our partners together. And this is change in action, research leading change. And so now that 3 hours that every student pilot must undergo was a result of that study. It also helped build some of our learn to turn, and it's furthered kind of our understanding of well, what happens when a pilot loses the visual reference and they don't have the training to handle it. And now we've said, well, the 1950s was a little while ago, so why don't we update that? And we want to look at, well, what are the emergent technologies? What else is in the cockpit today that can help pilots get out of it? And is that helping the overall scenario, as long as you understand if you have an autopilot, you're using it properly. If you have synthetic vision, you have a better understanding of how to safely navigate that turn or how to climb. So we want to take that back into the research realm, reconduct that study, bring it forward, modernize it, and reevaluate that 178 seconds, because it is 3 minutes. It's a little less than 3 minutes. Less time than it takes me to push the aircraft in the hangar, and you've already made a decision to potentially end your life.
That'll be interesting. I mean, my hypothesis is going to be that with the modern technology and glass, it should be better. You know, but what we have to be careful of is that doesn't mean we're encouraging pilots to take more risk, right, and go into sketchier situations. It's still a bad idea. But it sort of also encourages us as that, you know, that fourth element in our 5-point safety model is updating your aircraft with modern, reliable equipment. And there's just no question that one of the things that's helped us through the years drop the fatal accident rate by more than half over the last 25 years and have a record-setting year this year is that the technology that we're putting in the cockpits and knowing how to use it.
Yeah, knowing how to use it, I think, is a huge point of that. It's not just equipping the aircraft, it's going back to what you said at the beginning about being trained and proficient in that equipment, because there are, if you have an autopilot on your airplane, you better know how to use it. You better know how to turn it off as well. If there's anything on your aircraft, you need to know how to use it. If you're going from a 172 that's steam into a 172 that's glass, learn how to use all of that. Don't consider yourself safe to fly that airplane until you can go through all of it. So yes, the technology is there, but it's not going to do you any good if you don't know how to use it.
Yeah, you know, I think a sad example of that may have been, we did something new, Paul, we tried this year, was an early analysis video where we took an accident. It was the twin Cessna that went into the San Diego area. And we had good data from that because we had ATC comms, we had flight aware traffic, and we could see what the pilot did. And we don't know yet. NTSB hasn't done the investigation. We did a video on it. But it sure seemed like a case where you could have a pilot that gets very comfortable with taking off, engage the autopilot. The autopilot flies down to 400 or 500 feet on final, you know, cut off the autopilot and flare. And those of us who fly a lot with autopilots and Bonanzas or the twins or whatever it is, have to really be careful that we don't fall into that trap of that becomes our routine over and over and over again. And in this case, he had to fly a circling approach, which is very unusual for that airport, and it looked like it was probably gusty conditions, and would have been a tough thing to hand fly, you know, in a twin. And so even if that wasn't the cause, we don't know, it illustrated that point that come off autopilot and hand fly those things every now and then to make sure you still got your skills.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So what else do we have coming around? Paul, can you, let's peek under the tent a little bit for 2022. Yeah. What are we going to do in ASI for next year?
Going to be an exciting year for us next year. We have a lot more videos coming out that's insatiable appetite from our YouTube viewers on the accident case studies. So doing more of those.
I got to just stop you there for a second. Our Into Thin Air, so we just released the latest one that Tyler did called Into Thin Air. It was about a sad accident, about a Bonanza and density altitude accident. And I think that's been out 5 days, and it's over 200,000 views on that. So we know that people really sort of eat that up. And the comments on YouTube are really good about the lessons learned that came out of that. And that's why we do them, the lessons learned to hopefully save some lives in the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's looking forward to that. We also have Kurt working on real pilot stories, which is basically the same kind of analysis, but the pilot lived to tell his or her story, which is good.
Yeah.
We'll have some of those coming out next year. And we'll continue your monthly There I Was podcast so we can learn from the experiences of others. What's new for us next year too, it will be some highlights as far as the Focused Flight Review. For those of you not familiar with it, we can go to focusedflightreview.org, and it's basically a framework to do an effective flight review on a certain profile. Profiles anywhere from backcountry flying, even when you have seaplanes, IFR, CFIN, weather. So we're going to streamline that whole program, overhaul it, because we realize it is big, a lot of material there to consume in one flight review.
Yeah.
We cover everything, including the kitchen sink. So we want to kind of look back a little bit and streamline it and make it more user-friendly. So we're going to have some more scenarios based into that.
And we have 7 scenarios, right? And there's an exciting one too, where we took some elements of E3, Ed Wishmeyer's expanded aircraft, let me get this right, expanded envelope exercises.
Yeah.
Thanks. E3 is, I just refer to it as that. And there's a lot of exercise there, plus the Learn to Turn, from which Stowell, you had a webinar with him.
Yeah.
And we've incorporated some of those elements into our positive aircraft control scenario for flight review. So they're fantastic profiles for flight reviews. They come out on a knee board card you can print out, take it to your CFI and fly it. They have CFI instructions on them. We had a lot of people help us out with these throughout the industry, including NAFI and SAFE, to get instructor tips that go in there. So they're just fantastic.
Yeah. And they're really designed to target the areas that Rob always helps identify every year as far as the accident problem areas. You know, we try to embed that material into the Focused Flight Review program. Next, we have an exciting new video series on companion pilots. That's the working name right now, but I think a lot of people are familiar with the pinch hitter, which has been around for a long time. We want to take a fresh look at that, so we had some generous donors to step up to fund this program, Steve and Libby Moss.
Yeah.
And they're going to fund this program called the Companion Pilot Series. And we want to take a different spin from pinch hitter. Pinch hitter focused a lot on the incapacitation of the pilot and what the co-pilot can do to land in the emergency situation. We'll have some of that in there, but this is more emphasis on just the getting that co-pilot or passenger, non-pilot passenger more involved in flying from a positive point of view, get you more engaged and making it fun for you, exciting for you, and exploring your challenge of flying from the right seat, and hopefully someday to pursue their own pilot certificate.
Yeah, and Libby is such a great story, Libby Moss, because she started being afraid of flying, and then she went through a program, she had a great instructor, and she realized, oh, now I understand how planes fly and what all Steve's doing over there and flying and working the radio. And my wife said the same thing. She said, you know, when we fly, for you, it's interesting and exciting. For me, it's pretty boring because I don't know all that stuff you're doing over there. And so just helping them feel a better part of and more engaged in the cockpit is kind of what this is about.
Yeah, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
So that'll be out in probably the second quarter next year, the whole series. So we'll start releasing those when they come out. Lastly, John, tell us about the webinar series next year. Looking forward to this as well.
So we're going to do 4 different series, and we're going to spread it out over the year. We're going to start the year off with a discussion with the NTSB. We're calling this NTSB Insider, and the first webinar there is going to kind of take a behind the curtain look at how the NTSB does an accident investigation. What are they looking for? How do they arrive at their probable cause? What about the safety recommendations that they make? How does that all get done? And I think, you know, a lot of us may know bits and pieces of it. We see some of that, and we of course read the accident reports, and so we get that. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and frankly, why it takes a long time sometimes to get these reports out. So we're going to start with that. Then we have in February we'll start our flight deck tech series. In March we're going to go into, I believe it's backcountry flying. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll have a few seminars or webinars on that. And then the 4th series is going to be on weather flying. And so we've got that time, so we'll get to specific times in the year. We'll be able to talk about some upcoming weather events and weather phenomena we need to be careful with and be aware of. And so I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great series of webinars. Plus, we're also going to be out at aviation events. We'll be doing our in-person seminars there. And Paul, I think, can we preview our Safety in a Box or Safety to Go?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. Because we had this program years ago, right?
We did.
Safety to Go, and then we took it down for various reasons. But we were getting pretty good downloads on those, do-it-yourself seminar packages. Tell us more about that.
So we've got, I think we're releasing 7 next year, or 6 or 7 that we're going to put out there. And essentially you're going to get a slide deck that you can customize for your particular group or location, and presenter notes. And you can put on your own safety seminar and let people know what we know about the various topics. I think we're looking at radio communications, we're looking at emergencies. The rest of the list escapes my mind at the moment, but I know I've got a bunch of work on my desk to to get back to and finish looking at those.
Well, and I think it's important too, John. It's not just you or us developing these. We reach out to the experts in industry to help us put these together, and then make them available to people so we can spread the word.
Yeah, it is a collaborative process, definitely.
Yeah, it's really, we're very fortunate in that way that we have help from all over the industry of people that want to help us with safety.
It kind of reinforces your fifth point on the 5 points of ASI's safety model, is that culture aspect.
That culture piece,
so if we can get material in the hands of the community, we can help further that culture.
Yeah, great. Well, this has been great. Thank you for spending some time with us. We've had an exciting year this year. We know that if you consume safety material, you're going to be a safer pilot. And so that's why in the Air Safety Institute, we know that if you want to impact how pilots fly, you have to influence how they think, and you can't do that unless you reach them. So we work hard to reach you with engaging material, and you can find it on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook, you can find it on Instagram. Our podcast is free. It's been downloaded over 3 million times, and that's free on Spotify or iTunes. So anywhere you consume information at any time on whatever device, the Air Safety Institute is there. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for a fantastic year in GA safety. And as far as we've come, we've still got so much farther to go because we're still having fatal accidents, and we'd like to see those completely eliminated. So work with us to do that. And watch this short video before you go. We've had a fantastic year. Thanks to everyone involved in general aviation for making this the safest year ever. And let's work to make next year even safer. So from all of us here at the Air Safety Institute.
From the video team.
From the writers.
From the eFERC
Webinar.
and online learning team.
From data and analytics.
From program management and operations.
Happy holidays!
Not synchronized.
Happy holidays!